Good morning. We're here at the SME Assembly in Portorož, Slovenia from the European Union, and we welcome you very much to the webinar today that we're going to have from European Issuers and FESE on how to keep companies in Europe. My name is Rainer Ries, Director General of FESE, and I'm here with
Florence Vandel, Secretary General of European Issuers. Nice to see you today to this webinar. I'm going to give the floor to Petr Koblic, who's the president of FESE, but also the CEO of the Prague Stock Exchange, for some introductory remarks. Petr, the floor is yours.
Very good morning to all from Portorož, and thank you for joining our FESE European Issuers webinar. Today's topic is about Europe's competitiveness and how the European Union can ensure a favorable environment for companies to list on European venues. Regulated market, or stock exchanges as we also called, are designed to ensure the highest level of safety, fairness, and transparency, delivering the highest level of investor protection. This is why, as rightly identified by Commission some years ago, we need to showcase the advantage that listing on exchange offers to the companies when seeking access to capital. Attracting SMEs to the market is crucial and can be done firstly, making the appropriate amendment to the current regulatory framework supporting companies' listing, and secondly, by nourishing local ecosystems that best know the regional investment network, structure, and investors. We, the stock exchanges, are fully supportive of the drive to support the EU economy, and we will do our part to enable companies to access finance. On the other hand, EU policies can make a difference in delivering a comprehensive strategy, how to boost equity and non-equity financing at all stages of the funding escalator, with special regard to the small and mid-cap companies. I understand that upcoming public consultation on the Commission initiative labeled as Listing Act is a great opportunity to review the regulatory provisions in several EU laws, namely the prospectus regulation, the market abuse regime, and possibly the listing directive and a MiFID II. If we focus on the SME angle, this Commission initiative opens up large prospects for companies that really are the backbone of European economy. They are vitally important in supporting growth, creating higher level of innovation, wealth distribution, and most importantly, job creation. From our perspective at FESE, we will prioritize a clear and common definition of SMEs, reform targeted listing requirements, and simplify the market abuse regime. First, we concur the conclusion of the CMU High-Level Forum to incorporate the concept of small and medium capitalization companies as those who do not exceed a market capitalization threshold of €1 billion over a 12-month period. Second, we would encourage further changes to increase the attractiveness of SME growth markets, striking a balance between what is expected from SMEs when listing and adequate levels of safeguards and investment protection. And third, elevating requirements for growth market concerning the market abuse regime, which is applied almost in the same way as the four normal regulated markets. I would overall recommend for everybody to have a read of the Technical Expert Stakeholders Group report on SMEs to guide this discussion, which we welcome very much and we believe sheds some light on these important topics. To conclude, I'm looking forward to the SME Award ceremony taking place this evening, and I would like to make a warm congratulations to the companies that will be presented. Even if we crown only one winner per category, being listed on capital market is already a big achievement that makes every public company already a winner. Thank you, and over to Rainer and Florence.
Thank you so much, Petr, for your words, and we're also very much looking forward to the SME Awards this evening. But now, as you alluded to, it is time to discuss the substance of what Europe needs to change to keep more innovative. And we have Tatyana Panova with us, head of the CMU unit, and I think I couldn't believe anybody better placed to tell us a little bit what is in stock. What do we need to do, Tatyana?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Ryan and Florence. Thank you very much for the occasion to share my views. I will start with a general update and maybe a couple of words on the CMU more generally. One of the primary objectives of the CMU is to ensure that companies have access to diversified funding, be it venture capital, private equity, or financing through public markets. Petr has mentioned it in detail. Access to public markets remains impeded, in particular for smaller companies that struggle with meeting all of the legislative listing requirements and direct costs of listing, both related to the need to prepare voluminous listing documents and also to cover underwriting costs. While the listing numbers fluctuate quite a lot from one year to another and across member states, we have some member states who actually are doing not that badly. They remain quite subdued overall in the EU compared to the US markets. For example, in the US, there were roughly 3 times more IPOs in 2020 than in the EU. More so, the numbers of delistings has been growing for a while, with more delistings on multilateral trading platforms. While the interest in public markets is not as high today, public markets actually ensured a stable source of financing by secondary issuances even throughout the COVID crisis. Listed companies were therefore able to raise funding more easily than their unlisted peers. Under the CMU Action Plan, the Commission has already decided to put a big emphasis on the development of European public markets that are not only important as a source of diversified financing for companies, as I've mentioned at the beginning, but also overall for the economy. And I think Petr did mention that in his introductory remarks, as they contribute to growth, they contribute to job creation, because listed companies are known to, on average, generate more revenue and hire more staff, thus contributing overall to the prosperity of the EU economy. The CMU Action Plan addresses the issue of underdeveloped public markets from 3 angles. Firstly, by contributing to better integration of trading and making trading conditions more transparent by the review of the transparency regime and the establishment of a consolidated tape. Secondly, by addressing the supply side issues, seeking to better calibrate and streamline rules around listing and post-listing to ensure that the burden of going public and actually staying listed is commensurate with the benefits that companies accrue as a result of being listed. Thirdly, by addressing the demand side, by establishing the SME IPO fund that would seek to tackle the very problem of a weak investor base, in particular for smaller companies, and by consolidating and making more visible data on issuers in the European single access point. In addition to the considerations related to access to finance for EU companies, there are also considerations of competitiveness. It is important to make sure that EU, also looked at globally, is an attractive place for companies to list. Hence, an adequate and proportionate listing regime is important also for strategic considerations. In the past, a number of EU companies have decided to list in other non-EU jurisdictions, drawn at times by a wide investor base or deeper and more liquid public markets there. Many companies also favoured London as the place to list at the time when the UK was still part of the Union. Today, similarly to the EU, the UK is reviewing its listing rules. So it's important for us to stay abreast of global developments and ensure that our legislative framework offers the necessary setting both for issuers and investors. Commission President von der Leyen, in the context of her State of the Union address in September this year, announced a legislative proposal to facilitate access to capital for SMEs. This proposal is now part of the priority actions included in the Commission work program for this year, for the next year. Sorry. This shows that the Commission attaches particular importance to this issue. So, in a few words, why is the Commission looking into the listing rules? Well, first of all, there is evidence from all stakeholder groups, but also beyond, of high compliance costs stemming from regulation, both for companies that want to list and that want to stay listed. There are also regulatory constraints on contract terms. Here I'm talking about possibility to dually list or to be able to list using multiple voting rights. The imposed governance structures discourage at times the use of public markets for firms that find those requirements perhaps inadequate. Lack of information and visibility, especially for SMEs towards investors. Faced with costly information and insufficient liquidity, companies, in particular SMEs, are encountering a reluctance of investors to invest in them. As a result, decline of IPOs, delistings, and the use of alternative listing processes. Also less funding options, perhaps, and higher cost of capital for companies, less brand recognition for EU companies, less investment opportunities for EU investors, and less efficient allocation of capital in the EU. More generally, we're looking potentially at a less resilient EU economy, at a missed opportunity for EU growth, and lack, perhaps, or insufficient employment due to the general lack of competitiveness of EU markets. Today's context makes it even more relevant. COVID-19 crisis further reduced, in particular, SMEs' ability to raise capital via public markets and made them more reliant on debt financing. Easy access to public equity would help, therefore, to re-equitize smaller companies, rebalance their funding structures, also allowing them to weather better the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis, and put them on a more sustainable growth path in the longer term. So obviously, it is not the first time that the Commission is looking into the listing rules. The prospectus regime, for example, has already been amended in the past, actually several times. In 2017, the prospectus regulation replaced the prospectus directive as existing at the time, with a view to harmonizing a number of requirements across the EU. The regulation was then amended several times in 2019 with the SME growth market regulation, then in 2020 with the crowdfunding regulation, then again in 2021 to address the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on companies' financing through the capital markets recovery package. Similarly, the market abuse regulation, another important piece of legislation in the listing context, replaced the market abuse directive in 2014 to further harmonize these rules across the EU and to ensure the integrity of financial markets across the Union. It was then complemented by the market abuse directive on criminal sanctions for the more serious infringements, and was then amended on a few other occasions, like by benchmark regulation or SME growth market regulation. So what type of input will the Commission be taking into account in its listing review? There's a lot of input that has been provided to the Commission up to date. It will build on all of the input that we have received so far. So, Petr, you've mentioned the high-level forum in 2021. The Technical Stakeholder Expert Group published their report specifically focusing on the functioning of public equity markets, public markets, and SME growth markets in particular.
She's frozen a little bit. A question to our studio. Does she have a problem? You hear us?
Technical problems we see.
Okay, it's being sorted out, and we hope we're going to get her back. I think maybe that's already a good opportunity to tell you a little bit why we're here in Portorož. Again, the European Union organizes every year the EU Assembly, and that is taking place for 3 days. I think one of the last in-present physical events, I fear, before we will see another lockdown. Nevertheless, we've made our way out here, but we wanted to give a broader audience the opportunity to discuss these issues and to, I think, participate also with Tatyana in the discussion of the upcoming listing review. We'll have a panel after this, and I hope Tatyana can come back to finalize her intervention and what is being scoped in the listing review. Now you're back. That means us and Tatyana as well. So sorry, Tatyana, you were taken out.
Oh, right. The technical glitch, but we all experiencing the aftermath and consequences of COVID and teleworking from home. So I was just saying a few words on which input we will take into account, and I will try to be very brief because I think it's more important to focus on the actual elements. So we will of course take into account all of the input that we've received so far, the CMU high-level forum report, the 12th recommendation of the Technical Expert Group, the studies, a number of studies that we've done, including the Xero study on secondary and primary markets. We will also look at the SMEs reports that have been submitted to us on the functioning of the SME growth market, also on the functioning of the market abuse regime. So all of this will form the evidence base, obviously, that the Commission will take into account. In addition to that, we, and I think, Petr, you've mentioned that, are going to launch a public consultation that will have two parts to it. So a part addressed to the general public that will be a fairly high level, and then a very detailed, very targeted consultation addressed at practitioners and stakeholders, where you will see we're asking a lot of questions that will help us and guide us in our work on the listing review. So what will be the focal points of the upcoming consultation? So the consultation is going to be broad, as I said, and it will seek to look at all elements holistically of the listing regime. So starting from the obviously prospectus rules, market abuse regime, MiFID, listing directive, but also company law. So for example, with respect to multiple voting rights, corporate governance, and also, for example, asking a question on the transparency directive, even though the recent fitness check demonstrated an overall good effectiveness of the corporate reporting framework. So there will be a general catch-all question, but we thought that it was important to really cover all of the areas relevant for the listing regime. Now, specifically on the prospectus rules, we will be asking a number of questions, notably to dig deeper into the into the input and insights that we've got so far that seem to demonstrate that the regime is still, despite many reviews that I've mentioned previously, remains burdensome, and that it is largely unfit for attracting companies, in particular SMEs, to public markets. So this is the insights that we have received from the Technical Expert Group, from CMU Action Plan. So we would like now to look in depth and assess various dimensions and various elements of that review. So what we would like to see, what we would specifically be looking into, is the cost of different types of prospectus and the most cumbersome sections of the prospectus regime. We will try to assess to which extent a recovery prospectus represents a cost saving for secondary issuers. Obviously, that regime has not been in application for a long time, only since this March. However, it presents a very interesting study case for us to see also how the prospectus has been taken up and whether stakeholders consider that it in reality resulted in considerable cost savings. As part of the consultation, we will also ask questions on exemption thresholds, generally on the conditions when prospectus, either for public offer for admission to trading on a regulated market, is not needed. We will also explore with the stakeholders ideas of whether these conditions can be further extended. We will look at the size and length of a prospectus more generally. So not just for the purpose of recovery, but also on a more permanent basis, including the possibility of having a page limit, for example, for all types of prospectuses, and what it would imply also for the content, because of course you cannot limit the size of the prospectus without looking at the content. Particular attention will be paid to the SME growth prospectus. The consultation will also ask questions on the language and the liability regime for prospectus, and also on the scrutiny process by the supervisors. The consultation will put all options on the table and will seek to collect as many views as possible. On the market abuse framework, what we've seen from the task recommendations is that stakeholders want to have more legal clarity around certain MAR definitions. They also want to reduce the scope of some disclosure requirements. And there are concerns about the sanctions regime not necessarily being fully proportionate. So what we will be doing as part of the review is to look at the costs, let's say, and the element of proportionality. So of course we need to ensure market integrity and investor protection. So these are the primary considerations of the market abuse regime, but we also need to make sure that this regime is proportionate. Now, of course, we also have the SMEs report on the market abuse regime that, following wide consultation of stakeholders, concluded that the regime overall functions well, and recommending only a few very targeted amendments in this respect. So the emphasis will be, as I said, on ensuring proportionality, reducing burden, introducing legal clarity where perhaps stakeholders consider that there is an issue. So more specifically, we will be looking at the definition, once again, of the insider information, conditions for the disclosure, for the delay of insider information, insider lists, once again, market sounding regime, disclosure of the managers' transactions, also looking at the threshold there that are triggering those disclosures, and enforcement. Finally, two words, as I see that I'm running out of time, on variable voting rights. So what we've heard from the stakeholders is that allowing shares with variable voting rights is important for issuers. It is important for example, startups, innovative startups, where founders are fearing to lose control. And this consideration is one of the primary considerations for them before they decide to list or not to list. So we know that in some member states, multiple voting rights are allowed. In other member states, they're not allowed. So the consultation will put forward a number of questions to assess the merits of introducing rules at EU level, allowing listings based on multiple voting rights across all member states. So this is very briefly, and once again, apologies for the technical glitch, but very briefly on what we are going to look at as part of the consultation. So this is obviously only the beginning of the journey and not the end of the journey, and probably even not the beginning, because we've done a lot of preparatory work with many of the stakeholders. So this work will of course play a very important role in the analysis and in the assessment. And then the objective is then to table a legislative proposal in the second half of the next year, so that we actually put forward rules, perhaps not in time for the recovery, but for the post-COVID, let's say, aftermath, and you know, in order to ensure that the economy can return to growth more quickly. Thank you very much, and very happy to also participate in the panel discussion.
Well, thank you. And no worries, we already introduced a bit our panel that we're going to bring out now, and I think it's probably good to do that at this stage. We have actually here in the room Jesus Gonzalez, who is sitting with us here in Porto Roche. Then I think Barbara Lunghi is with us from Italy, and Miroslav, I would suppose you're with us from Poland. Well, welcome to all of you, and maybe I start with the first question from a little bit what Tatyana outlined, and that question probably goes to the three that just joined. We heard a lot of proportionality of the listing regime, reduce burdens, give legal clarity around MAR. What about voting rights? There was a lot of reports, and I think Tatyana gave a very holistic view. The TESG report, the high-level report, now is coming the Listing Act. But what is really the top three priorities that we need to go for? I mean, if you would want to tell Tatyana after she's done the review, what should be the three things that we need to again change to make Europe competitive? Barbara, you want to start with that? And I see we just lost Barbara, maybe. So I would ask Miroslav.
Well, thank you very much. I hope it's not the idea that someone who's trying to speak will disappear. So fortunately, you can see and hear me. Well, it would be very, very difficult to find three most important items, but what I could say is that definitely something which changed a lot in relation to the Polish market was in introducing of MAR regulation. And that, just to give you some figures, I would say that since the starting operation of MAR, so starting from 2016, over 100 companies left the market in net terms. So more of them left the market, but some of them were joining. But in net terms, we have over 100 companies less now than 5 years ago. And to a large extent due to MAR regulation, and obviously looking from the perspective of the Polish market, from the perspective of micro companies, it could be perhaps different than on other markets, but I'd like to underline that analyzing micro companies is like using microscope. So I can see many things which are not visible yet on other markets, but which does not mean that bigger companies do not have problems with that. Perhaps these problems are less visible. It's not the question that these companies will not survive, but definitely there are some problems with competition towards non-listed companies, and I think it's very, very important. If I have to focus on three most important initiatives, what I would say is perhaps, well, definitely more clarity in definitions of MAR, more competitive market towards small and medium enterprises. So I think there should be created an infrastructure which we within European issuers call a micro market model. So special listing model for micro companies, which would be available preferably for free for them and for investors. So I think this will be not three, but two most important things. And the third, proportionality. This is very, very important, but it has been mentioned already. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Miroslav, and that's probably good to introduce then Barbara to say what are the three priorities you would see, Barbara?
Yes, I'm sorry, I had technical problems. Well, it's really difficult to say because all the topics mentioned are important, and it's a very interesting initiative to consult the market and to put together a number of measures that all together could really make the difference. If I have to mention anyway, the three priorities, I would say the first one, and would be by far, I would say the first one would be to foster a dedicated ecosystem and a dedicated pool of liquidity. We really need a broad pool of dedicated investors, meaning capable and specialized to invest in SMEs with the proper business model, and as well with the possibility to have sector specificities, like in the tech sector, with the skills that companies need and the market need to properly evaluate the investment in SMEs and tech companies in order to compete with the private market, and as well investors that are in a way have the possibility to invest both in public markets and private markets. So it could happen through fiscal incentives, we've seen over the years in the different jurisdictions some fiscal incentives working properly in encouraging the investment in SMEs, in innovative SMEs and startups, but could be as well through dedicated fund of funds. We've proposed these kind of initiatives both in Italy and at European level. So where or if the fiscal incentives are not sufficient to encourage certain behaviors, maybe putting the money on the table is more effective, or it could complement the fiscal incentives. We've seen those kind of initiatives to be put in place in order to touch the market failure on private equity investment, on venture capital investment, on private debt investments. I believe we need that on small public small caps as well. I've mentioned that the experience of the growth market has been really successful in Italy. Lately, we had more than
I think there we lost Barbara. I think her connection is weak. So let me go over to Jesus. Jesus, what would be your top three priorities where you would think we need to focus on?
Thank you, Rainer. And I would agree very much on what Barbara to be a tax incentive, but obviously we need to start working on that. Extraordinarily important to think small first. So the complexity in access and maintenance regulations should be addressed carefully. And third, I think we all have to promote the visibility of these SME companies. And a good step forward would be to promote the financial research on SMEs. It is very important to help investors to get familiar with these companies through a professionalized opinion to be shared with them. So I would say these three priorities: investors, less complexity, and more visibility through the financial research.
Great. I think that gives us a good overview for the initial round on, I think, things you need to tackle, Tatyana. With that, maybe I give over to Florence.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, in the introduction, Petr Koblic mentioned an important aspect to make this EU capital markets more competitive, which is the need to review eventually the definition of what is an SME, and he made some proposals which are also being discussed in the report, and that we touch a little bit in the opening speech of Tatyana. So maybe I'd like to ask, I mean, maybe Jesus, would you like to briefly comment on this and give you your views? Jesus.
Yeah. The thing is that currently definition is very diverse on what is an SME. So following the path marked by the high-level forum of the CMU, instead categorize the companies on accounting rules or on the number of the count of the company. And the group decided that that was a very good idea to find a new and broader definition and a new concept. And we finally get to what we call the small and medium capitalization companies, SMCs instead of SMEs, because okay. Okay, maybe you can hear me that way. Okay, so what I was telling is that this new definition and broader definition and concept of SMCs, or small and medium capitalization companies, will help to broader to capture more issuers. They will be in line with the US Jobs Act and even the Stock Exchange classification and investors' perception of what is an SME in terms of, I insist, market. And the proposal is to include in this definition any listed companies, no matter if it's in SME growth market or in regulated market, with a market cap of less than 1 billion. And that would fit in the international investment standards and the perception of what is a mid-cap or a small cap. Because after all, they all share the same troubles. They face high complexity regulation with high cost, proportion with the size of the company, the lack of financial research. There is a low number of specialized investors. This is a common trouble for companies that market cap of 50 million or of 500 million, of 700 million. It is exactly the same for all of them. So the benefit will be to put together more companies, and that will allow small and mid-growth, so SME growth companies, growth markets, to develop more clarity, and all these companies to capture more aid, more tax incentives, more attention from all the investment community.
Thank you very much, Jesus, for this. Thank you very much. Sorry, we were muted. Thank you for those comments. I think it's important because it's also some of the guiding principles that we saw in the report, like simplification, proportionality, but also flexibility. And we, as European issuers, we also support this direction. So, Rainer, maybe up to you for the first one. Next one, questions.
Yeah, maybe I think let's get to the heart of it, the listing requirements and what needs to change to make us more competitive. And Miroslav, you started to talk a little bit also about proportionality and the burden. Maybe you want to expand a bit on that. What would be the major task that you would see?
Thank you very much. I will be glad to answer to the question. Perhaps one comment relating to the previous issue, which is definition of SME. I think that, well, it's important to have one single definition, but what's even more important is to have appropriate representation of SMEs in the regulatory process. Well, the problem is that although the regulations, are created the same for everyone, it does not mean that the chances are equal. For obvious reasons, SMEs are not present in a regulatory process. They do not have resources to read all the documents, be on the meetings in Brussels, have their lobbyists, and so on and so on. So we have to be aware that all the regulation which is being created, it does not reflect the views of SMEs. To change it, I could see two possible solutions. One of them, some special regulatory requirement, for instance, necessity to consult draft regulations relating to SMEs with SME panel and a body which will be created representing that the SMEs will be forced to say something on that. Or second, creating in Brussels SME ombudsman or someone who will work for them, simply speaking. Now, answering your question, what is the burden, why we're talking about proportionality and so on. We have initiated a pilot program of costs and benefits of listing on the Polish market. And we have first results of that, which really do not look well. I mean, the costs are really enormous. The most visible costs, which we usually perceive as costs of listing, so the listing fees for central depository, for the supervisory agency, and so on, they constitute about 5-7% of the whole costs of listing. Well, there are many other financial costs which usually are not reflected, they are not usually perceived. So this is the first problem. And what is perhaps even more important, that on the top of that, you've got a lot of costs, which are non-financial costs related to listing. So there's a problem of competition with non-listed and non-transparent companies. There's a problem of not entering in many, very prospective projects due to the fact of listing, because you are afraid of some reputation problems if you fail, that there is a problem of short termism, obviously, which you don't have in the private market, and the problem of avoiding complex projects, because you have to enter the projects that your shareholders will understand. So these are really huge costs. And on the other hand, what's very surprising, we couldn't identify benefits. So this is the problem, that the companies could not identify, well, actually, what I win being listed. And unfortunately, not too much or even nothing. So we have gathered a lot of information of what are the major cost sources and what are the possibilities of improving the situation in terms of benefits. So what would be done to make listing cool again, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe I would, you see we're assembling here, we're forming a larger social bubble to have a better connection. I maybe would ask Tatyana, Tanya to react, because I think you heard about the size of the SME. Peter mentioned that, Jesus did, and I think also the burdens, and maybe just some reflections. I know you've been debating the two issues for a long time, so maybe just you can tell us what you think on those two issues.
Yes, absolutely. So starting with the size of the SME, I know that, and I've been following this very closely, the CMU high-level forum and also the Technical Expert Group spent a lot of time discussing whether or not the definition should be changed and aligned, because I think indeed there are different definitions used across financial but also non-financial legislation, of course, in Europe. To me, if you want just my personal view, if you wish, it in a way took away the focus from what really matters. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter how we define an SME, as long as overall the setting for all companies and smaller companies is appropriate. The approach that we've taken so far is to ensure that for the same type of venue, we apply the same type of rules, for example. So this is the approach that we've been following so far with the first listing review. What it means in practice, that the same rules, for example, would apply to SME growth market for all of the issues listed on SME growth market. The current definition of the SME growth market requires only at least 50% basically of companies being listed to be falling in this definition of an SME, which is the definition that is linked to this 200 million capitalization. So obviously other companies, and we have, I think, data that demonstrate that a lot of companies that are being listed on SME growth markets actually exceed this threshold and exceed by many times. So there are actually companies with a capitalization of 1 billion that are being listed also on SME growth markets. So for me, what is important is perhaps to keep the focus on the type of rules that apply to different types of venues, because I think also truncating rules too much, also for different types of companies or different types of venues, might add to the complexity of something which is already fairly complex. So maybe let's focus on what really matters. Not to speak, and this is of course perhaps more of an issue to us than to you, but not to speak of the political sensitivity around the definition of an SME, because while 1 billion might be a small company for Jesus and maybe for Barbara, a 1 billion company, a company with a 1 billion capitalization might not be that small for Miroslav, and definitely would not be small for my home member state in Latvia. Actually, in my home member state, it would be considered a large company. So there are differences across member states that are non-negligible. And I think we should not necessarily go for a one-size-fits-all approach in this sense, and really focus on the areas where we can make a change. And I think this also goes to the second point that Rainer, you've made. So proportionality and making sure that rules are proportionate and not as burdensome as they should be, because obviously we have the legislative intent behind. So market abuse is there to protect investors, to ensure market integrity, to make sure that there are no abuses where actually investors suffer from. So this objective will stay there and should be safeguarded no matter what. So the issue is really about answering the question of whether or not what we currently have allows for the adequate and optimal protection of investors and market integrity, while at the same time being adequately tailor-made and calibrated and proportionate for issues. Because at least what we hear is that while prospectus was meant to be as an investor protection document largely, it turned out to be a very good source of revenue for lawyers who are actually using it to overcome all kinds of angles from the liability point of view. So I think we need to go back to the origin and to really get to the bottom of what the main objective of each, for example, form of the disclosure is, and really try to calibrate it to the main objective while keeping the proportionate regime. And I think also it was very interesting for me to hear to what Miroslav said about what impact MAR had on the Polish listing market. And actually, I think one of the reasons is that on top of perhaps not always fully calibrated regime, there are not always fully calibrated and proportionate sanction regime that goes with it. And if, on the one hand, you don't have full legal clarity about definitions, about instances when information needs to be disclosed on the one hand, and very high penalties, pecuniary or otherwise, if, in case for non-compliance with those disclosures, this is basically a recipe for disaster, because smaller companies in particular who might fear the risk of actually paying all of those sanctions, coupled with simply not having enough legal certainty and the need to seek constant legal advice on when or when they're not in compliance with MAR rules, I think leads them away in a way from listing and from public markets, quite to the contrary to what we're trying to achieve with this legislation.
Let me maybe bring in Barbara and afterwards Jesus again. I mean, if I look at it a little bit, proportionality has been, I think, at the heart of the new market or AIM in the UK back in the late years of the last millennium, when I think those kind of markets were set up. And obviously AIM in Italy has been a rather good success, and certainly proportionality has been, I think, a key theme in when these type of markets were constructed. But I'm pretty sure there's other success factors. I know in the UK it was, for example, also the taxation regime. So Barbara, tell us a little bit about what other things really to look at. What do regulated markets need to learn from growth markets such as AIM Italy?
Yes, I would say, first of all, the market now is Euronext Growth Milan. And yes, what we've learned from this market is that we built the market together with the community. We really, I must say that when we first imported the AIM model in Italy, it didn't work, because we made at the beginning in 2009, when we merged with London Stock Exchange, a sort of copy and paste of the AIM model, and it didn't work. So it took time, and it took almost 10 years to refine the model and properly build it with the community, properly understanding the company needs, the ecosystem need, and the investors need. And it took time to build a proper trust within this ecosystem. And then fiscal incentives made the difference. Both incentives introduced for investors starting from 2017 with personal saving plans and with as well incentives dedicated to innovative SMEs. About 40% of the companies currently listed are classified as innovative SMEs according to a dedicated Italian register. And then from 2018, we had as well incentives on IPO costs, covering 50% of the IPO costs of smaller companies according to SMEs according to the EU definition, with a cap of 500K. So proper market infrastructure, proper balanced approach, and incentives to build population of local investors, and as well incentives to encourage companies, and balancing the cost of equity to align it hopefully to the cost of debt made the difference. So while we're not experimenting the same results on the regulated markets, so what we are thinking is that balance is not there. The balance of proposing a proper regulation for companies that have the possibility to access the public market, but now as well to a very liquid and dynamic private market as well, should encourage us to be more competitive in building a value proposition for those companies, and as the reports say, make the listing cool again, finding the proper balance in terms of easing the access for companies, and as you've mentioned, give the proper investor protection, not the over protection or the over let's say the over requirements requested to listed companies in order to stay listed on the market. We could encourage the transfer from the grow markets, and there are a number of proposals in the TESG report supported by FESE. And yes, the companies on grow markets are already listed, and wide spend, and this is the figures that they gave us, 1 billion euro to 1 million euro to list to transfer to the regulated market without raising further money. 1 million is a lot, it's too much. The company is already listed, is already disclosing, and so it should be encouraged the possibility to transfer without being that kind of costs. So I think it's important to foster the growth of the strengthen the grow market, because they're playing a very important role, and they could play even a more important role, and we could definitely increase the size of the companies willing to list on the grow markets. But then as well, in order to enter in global investors' portfolio, and being covered by main indexes, encouraged the transfer to the regulated market with a different burden for companies.
Very much having a good life cycle to the company. Jesus, the experience maybe from Madrid.
Well, I should also say that there is no magic formula. So the thing is how to build the trust of the whole environment, and that takes time. You need success cases, you need a cautious approach, and go step by step. I insist that the most difficult thing is to bring investors on board. In our case, we lack of the Spanish state tax incentive, although we have enjoyed some regional tax incentive for Madrid and Catalonia, and that helps a lot. because it helps to take the attention from the investors to this kind of investment. But I should say that the most important is that those investors are well prepared to invest in this. I mean, bringing non-informed investors to this kind of market is very dangerous, because in the long term they just don't understand why they win or why they lose. Okay, so extremely important to build a local group of investors as a first step. In our case, family offices, private banking are doing a very good job, and there is a handful of small micro caps funds that also are working quite well. And only when you have this environment, you can jump into the next step, is attracting international investors also to your market. But all these, you have to be patient and try to build on solid ground any step. I insist, investors, in my opinion, is essential. And obviously, if the investor is well informed, the quality of the company for them is very interesting. So they will act as a natural filter to take the most promising companies, the most growing companies to the market. This is what can I share on our experience. Thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, let me maybe ask for this round a last bit provoking question, maybe to Tatyana. When I listen to everything, I think, you know, if I look at the CMU project, it's been, I think, a lot of very laudable initiatives, and I think a lot has been done. You rightly pointed to the various reviews on prospectus listing that have already occurred. We're doing it again, and I think this is all good. But if I look at the market reality, we've seen Spotify has gone to the US, BioNTech has gone to the US, and many other companies seek NASDAQ. And obviously, I know there are things outside of the scope what the EU can do. For example, the lack of harmonization when it comes to insolvency regime, that we have 27 different corporate governance regimes, and which make it difficult for international investors to understand Europe. We're very diverse in language, in culture, in history, and I think that became also very clear in the discussion. And we're spending a lot of time, and absolutely useful and I think well calibrated time, to get better in the detail. But is that enough, or do we need to also encourage, for example, member states to be more bold on that? What is sort of your wish list when looking at that and being in charge for Capital Market Union, like the broader view, to come back to our title, How to Keep Companies in Europe?
That's a very good question, Rainer, and I'm asking myself the same question quite regularly. I don't think there is a silver bullet. I think there is evidence that fiscal incentives are one of the most effective, efficient way of attracting investors and issuers to list. So, or even, you know, for companies to provide research. So even for building the ecosystem that Barbara was talking about around listed companies, that perhaps smaller companies need much more than bigger companies, but everyone needs to a certain extent. So there are things that are definitely driving a change, and, you know, tax, this is more immediate. You know, there are things that, you know, will have an immediate impact, like a direct impact, quick impact, and things that will take time for them to trickle down and to actually drive together with them a structural changes, as we call. And you've mentioned insolvency rules. I think we're also working on the withholding tax procedures, which is also very relevant for cross-border investor. If we're truly loyal to our objective of building an integrated market for capital. So all of these things matter. Whether they will have, you know, the decisive effect in tilting the balance in favor of many more listings in Europe, I think only time will tell. I very much hope so. I think what is important is to go together with the member states and to make sure that we are not, the change is not driven only from Brussels, because we can propose laws, but in the end, laws are then agreed by the member states and the parliament. And then the member states have a much bigger role to play in establishing national ecosystems that also, I think, Jesus mentioned. It is important to go in tandem. And I think member states understand that. That's my belief. But there are just too many things on their to-do list, and those lists are very long. And I simply don't know how high up, the support of public markets is in this list. And I would like it to be very high, because I think this is indispensable to making sure that we have we build the full funding escalator. I think, Rainer, you did mention that as well, through the full life cycle. We need all of the elements of this funding escalator, not just venture capital or crowdfunding or business angels or private equity or public equity markets. So we need all of it. And I think currently there are problems more pronounced in some parts of this funding escalator than in other parts. Some of this is driven just by market, conditions, macroeconomic conditions, or also by historical reasons. So I think the objective and the primary role of lawmakers, and I'm not talking only about EU lawmakers, but also national lawmakers, is to make sure that we do not lose sight of this global comprehensive view and really tackle things jointly together for the maximum effect. Because if we just propose the rules, but then the member states actually remove incentives or instead provide incentives for other types where you don't necessarily have an issue, then you may skew the balance once again. And then all of the efforts that we're trying to put forward at the EU level might not really generate the result that we are hoping for. So it should very much be joint action. I would very much like to join Barbara's call that the member states should consider fiscal incentives. Of course, they should consider them alongside other factors and see whether they're the most appropriate tools in a given case, but they're known to be extremely effective. So if the problem is really acute in a particular member state, I would argue that this is one of the remedies that should definitely be strongly considered at national level. And of course, at the EU level, we would love to have more competence in the matters of taxation. Unfortunately, we're not there, so our competences are fairly limited. So we are already stretching, I think, the boundaries of the possible with looking, at the and trying to harmonize the rules around the withholding tax procedures. But of course, substantive tax rules remain within the remit of the member states.
Thank you for those comments, Tatyana. I think it's a good point about having a current strategy, not only at EU level, but also, at the member states level. There is another area of discussion which is connected to not only the competitiveness of the EU industry, but the competitiveness connected to the sustainability aspect, which is at the core of the EU agenda for the moment with the developments of the new reporting standards for sustainability. And I would like to have a little bit of discussion around this and the question about, will this new reporting standard help or hinder SME financing particularly? And how could these developments be manageable not only for the companies, but also from useful for the investors' perspective? We would like to have some views on this area, which hasn't been yet discussed. And maybe we could start with Miroslav. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, again, I will look from the perspective of micro companies, and this is quite problematic because reporting ESG factors by micro companies seems both necessary and impossible. It seems necessary because, well, if they don't report, if it's not reported through all the value chain, then it wouldn't make any sense because big reporting companies would be buying all the dirty stuff from small non-reporting companies. So if you want to have a system which is complete, Well, we have to, in fact, have all the companies, including micro companies, in the system. They have to report ESG factors, which seems impossible because calculation of many ESG factors is complicated. But I think I could have a kind of solution to that, which is an easy, intuitive, and free of charge infrastructure for gathering and reporting of ESG data by micro companies. Because if we look, for instance, at Scope 3 reporting, CO2 emissions in Scope 3, it's very, very difficult to calculate. But it's very difficult because lack of the data. It's very easy to calculate at any level Scope 1 and 2. So if Scope 1 and 2 of any micro company is in the system, then calculation of Scope 3, well, it's extremely easy. So if the system is available, if the companies are connected to that, if they can easily add their Scope 1 and 2 emissions there, then everything would be in transparent way calculated. It could be similar like value-added tax on invoice and so on, that and on every given stage of production, it's accumulated. For instance, CO2 to have Scope 3 calculated automatically. So if we have to do something which is or seems both impossible and necessary, perhaps creation of this kind of infrastructure would be a good solution. Thank you.
Thank you for your perspective, Miroslav. Would like to invite the others to comment also with their own experience and perspective on this.
Yes, maybe I would comment on the experience we had around sustainability. Of course, standardization is important, but it is as well important not to properly set the standardization for SMEs with a proportionate approach as well, and monitor the evolution of both SMEs profile in terms of sustainability and the investors and SMEs investors effective allocation to companies that are investing in sustainability. So what we've done so far is to foster the dialogue between companies and investors in order to grow together in their sustainability profile and approach. It happened that companies were disclosing or preparing and answering to a number of different questionnaires, and they didn't know if anyone was eventually reading those questionnaires. At the same time, during the one-on-one meetings with investors did not have the habit to engage with the companies on sustainability matters. So what we've done is to build a dedicated initiatives. This year, it was the fourth edition of the Sustainability Week, now delivered in a digital format, in which we ask to companies and investors to sit down and have one-on-one meetings and be focused only on sustainability. And we saw over the 4 years, the conversations were from 20% of sustainability, now is 80% or 100% of sustainability. So very different conversations compared to the usual investors roadshows. And we started with larger companies, built role model for smaller companies, and now we are encouraging, especially the companies belonging to the star segment, to raise their profile in terms of ESG, but always having in mind the investors' needs, in order not to gold plate on what is needed in terms of disclosure and embedding the sustainability within their equity story. So far it has worked, but of course it will be a long journey that we'll have to make all together in Europe.
Thank you, Barbara. Jesus, do you want to comment as well?
Well, the challenge here, obviously, is to find the right balance between standardization and feasibility for the small caps. We also have an experience. We are just starting a service from the Stock Exchange plus the National Association of Researchers, of Analysts, and trying to build up, with the help of a third party, a set of standards specially designed for small and micro caps, and offering them advising and well, a rating, at least a way to report to the investors how they are tackling the different challenges in the SNG for a micro cap. And in the first step, it's starting to work, because it is very frustrating that many small and micro companies are, just because of the business they develop, completely into the sustainable economy, but they just don't have the means to qualify at a certain standard that is very complicated for them. For example, a solar energy producer, a small one, or installer that is completely in this kind of business, but they don't have enough people in the headcount to dedicate for this. So trying to adapt the standards is the challenge. On the other hand, I understand, everybody understands that having a myriad of standards, of different standards, it just is the contrary of the definition of a standard. So, well, we have to work on this, and that's why I think it would be very helpful from the European Commission to think it over on building a special subset of standards for the tiny companies to be accessible for them, and well, at the same time, enough for the investors that are specialized in this kind of companies. Yes.
Thank you very much, Jesus. I think you underlined the importance of flexibility and the fact that we are in the transition period, particularly for the small cap in respect to the future requirements on the sustainability for small caps. Maybe we would go for the latest comments and the latest round. Rainer, I'll give over to you.
Yeah, I think I think again, it's probably my intervention I made a while ago to Tatyana, where I think we're discussing a lot, and I think there are very important things to be done, and the Listing Act and the review that Tatyana has described, I think, shows that there is a lot of work in detail to be done, and I think it is very helpful detail. And I think we heard very much from Miroslav, Barbara, and Jesus that it is about calibrating the ecosystem in the right way, that it's not too burdensome, that it is proportional, that it's actually doable for the companies and fit for purpose, and that markets come together. So I think that's the one thing. On the other hand, obviously, we need to be mindful of what does that mean in the geopolitical sense of financing our economy, and ensuring that we remain attractive enough that international capital comes to Europe, that it seeks European companies, and the companies simply stay. And I think that was a little bit the overall heading of the seminar. So maybe I would ask, as a final comment, you maybe not thinking about the small problems, thinking about the big problems. What is maybe what you would want? And Miroslav, maybe you can start, followed by Barbara and Jesus, and then we give Tanya a final word. What's sort of the big thing Europe needs to do in order to be more competitive in global markets to attract capital?
Thank you very much, Rainer. I think one big thing which we are not talking about is, in fact, what exchanges themselves could do to better take care of the companies, to attract them to the market, to keep them on the market. And the problem which I can see is that, well, unfortunately, there is no competition in relation to listing services. So you can change your supplier of gas, electricity, telecommunication services, but you cannot not change supplier of listing services. Once you started listed on a given exchange, you will stay there forever, which means that there is no competition. And the problem is that I know that from the perspective of exchanges, perhaps it does not look very good to start competing. But in the long run, I think it would be good. Because in case we will have exchanges which have to take care about their clients, about issuers, then in the longer run, perhaps they would keep more companies in Europe. There would be less reasons for leaving our market to list abroad. Thank you.
Although I would say you've seen some companies listing from Germany and France, or if they're biotechs in Switzerland. So there's a little bit of intra-European competition, but
But once you started listed on a given exchange, you cannot change this listing service. So this is the problem I'm referring to. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Barbara.
Well, I like the idea and the comments you made in terms of coordination of European effort and local and member states efforts. I think it's very important. So listing should be considered cool at European level and at member state level properly considered cool, meaning that it should be a priority in the way Europe and member states see the competition towards other environments. So it should be prioritized. It should be companies that go public should be a role model, and should be and proper initiative should be dedicated, and proper policy should be dedicated in a coordinated way. As well, monitoring from a European perspective when there's a gold plating introduced at a local level, which is something that we experiment in Italy, for example. So we appreciated the assessment made on the Italian market by the OECD in 2020. It gave us and to the exchange and to the policymakers a lot of food for thoughts and potential initiatives to build a competitive market. So yes, I would say coordinate the actions and monitor that we are all aligned in the objective to making this thing cool again, and with a joint effort.
Jesus.
Well, as a final statement, I should say that we have hardly spoken about culture, about financial culture. This is something that, in which, in my opinion, the European Commission can help a lot. They can help with programs, they can help with coordination, they can help with recommendations of best practices, trying to educate both companies to discover how much the markets can help them in building up the development, and also for investors to be prepared to invest in these small businesses. And secondly, I should say that again, the helping to build a prepared investor community is crucial. For example, the IPO fund project is very interesting, and if we can concentrate in this kind of programs in the short or mid-term, will help a lot. And maybe in 10 years will not be necessary on, but now we need it, and we need it at a local level to be true. I don't see so important that small or micro companies list whatever. I mean, these companies will come with the time. The important thing is to have the companies, no matter
Tatyana, some final words.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to others. For us as policymakers, what would be important and what would be maybe a factor or an indication of success of our work is to make sure that there are more listings and there are more cross-border listings, not driven by the considerations of regulatory arbitrage, but by economic considerations. And probably the ultimate success would be if we can manage to attract rather US companies and UK companies to list in Europe and not the other way around. So that would be probably an indication that we've succeeded in doing our work properly. And one last remark is we have lots of objectives and different geopolitical, economic objectives. Green transition is very important. Not all of these objectives go hand in hand. So I think for policymakers, what we need to make sure that we stay at least consistent and coherent in what we do, because this is very important, as some of our actions might add to the burden, while at the same time pursuing a bigger goal like sustainability, which no one disputes today, and the importance of this. But at the same time, it might have an impact on the willingness of companies to list, or the ability of companies to list. So from an advice to myself is to try to stay sober and ensure that we are consistent in our policy choices and policy direction. And of course, the member states support us across our journey, because on our own, as I said, and the Parliament, on our own, we can do very little. Only jointly we can really change things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatyana. Thank you very much, Miroslav, Jesus, and Barbara for participating to the webinar today. A lot of ideas have come on the table. We see a concrete action plan from the Commission. We definitely, I think, will all participate and provide you with our comments. We are here to support the developments and make sure that indeed companies are kept in Europe. So thank you again for your participation. And now we will go to the closing round, how to keep companies in Europe. We discussed a lot of technical issues, but is it enough? I mean, should we do more? We would like to have the high-level perspective, the concluding remarks for...
And goodbye from our side.
And goodbye from our side. So, Rainer, do you want to introduce?
Well, goodbye, and looking forward very much to the closing remarks from Vansteenkiste, Chairman of European Issuers. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar overall. Sorry for some glitches, but we are again in a remote location. I think for that it worked quite well. And I'm quite curious to hear what Luc will tell us. Thank you, Luc.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rainer and Florence. And my sincere thanks to all the panelists and our moderators for this very interesting exchange on the issues of SMEs trying to access the regular markets. I will try to make a short resume of what was said and at the end a recommendation, but starting from the fact that we all know that SMEs as such are the real creators of jobs. And second, that we witness that newly listed SMEs become key drivers of new investments, often surpass their privately owned counterparts in terms of annual growth, workforce increase, and innovation potential. However, in general, we witness a global important reduction over the last decade in number of companies on the EU stock exchange markets. And in particular, it is a fact that since many years in the EU, we are underperforming in creating better access to regulated markets for SMEs. Many different problems in that respect have already been discussed today. I just make a short resume of it. Increasing compliance costs in general, the fear of new high complexity related to the upcoming ESG regulation, the important differences in market caps between, for example, Western and Central Europe countries, and the constatation that SMEs today, if interested in the stock market, opportunities start mostly on growth markets, but remain there because the step to the regulated market is too difficult and costly. At the same time, those SMEs on the growth markets complain about the non-interest of institutional and retail investors and asset managers who consider the cost of analysis too high versus the return potential for most of those companies. And last but not least, we have, it was not mentioned, but I want to mention it as EU, with the Brexit, an important challenging competitor at our doorstep when we look at the European Union, disposing of high flexibility for easing regulation on their internal London stock market, and it's still an important market, whatever we can think about it. So it is therefore evident, as also Tatyana said, that to respond to these challenges, EU faces quite a difficult task that cannot be solved with a single solution type one-size-fits-all. The EU will have to work, and we heard is working already in depth on a global approach. First, defining a set of basic standards, that's my recommendation for tomorrow, while allowing sufficient time to implement. And second, let individual member states take initiatives that are of specific interest for their particular situation. In other words, the EU will have to offer the member states a second set of specific action possibilities, allowing them to optimize their action in function of what they live specifically at a particular moment and the environment in which they know their evolution. Many good ideas in that respect have been already listed in the report of the Technical Expert Group for SMEs published in May 2021, an initiative of the EU following the recommendations of the High-Level Forum on Capital Markets Union of June 2020. Both FESE and European issuers are fully engaged to give full support to the implementation of those recommendations. Thank you for your presence, and I wish you a pleasant day.